So now it's 4 o'clock, and welcome everyone to the Marin County Free Library Master Gardener Program on effective watering during drought, which unfortunately, of course, we all have to worry about right now. Today's speaker is Lois Stevens, who's been a UC Marin Master Gardener since 2008 and has been gardening for more than 50 years. She currently chairs the Marin Master Gardener Help Desk Service, has been responsible for training new Marin Master Gardeners, served on the board of directors, and makes presentations to the Master Gardener program on garden-related topics at events such as this. So welcome all, and thank you, Lois, for doing this.
You're very welcome. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. So let's see. It's not letting me get there. There we go. And there we are. Well, I see that a lot of you are people that I know through Master Gardeners, so welcome. And I'm happy to be here and seeing people, even if they're on little tiny boxes. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about how you can effectively water during drought. And let me see, why is not letting me advance? Uh-oh. Okay, there we go. That's how I'm going to have to do it today. For those of you that don't know, Marin Master Gardeners are volunteers that have been trained to be volunteers for the UC Cooperative Extension. We are providing Marin residents with research-based information in all aspects of gardening, health and practices, horticulture, pest management, and earth-friendly landscape practices. So, you know, through a number of years of publications from the University of California's Agricultural and Natural Resources Publications Unit, there is this adage that is in many of these publications, and it says that successful gardeners fertilize adequately, but not excessively. They irrigate thoroughly, but not too frequently. And they promote good soil structure by mixing organic material into the soil and minimize the tilling of the soil when it's wet. With fertilizing in drought conditions, you don't really want to do it because that promotes a lot of new growth, and new growth requires a lot of water. So you're wanting the plants during drought to get by with as little as possible and do enough to still live and be healthy, but not to do excessive amounts of growth. You'd like the growth to be really slow. So you're not going to want to fertilize a lot. You can do some of the fertilizing that you need to do and promote good soil structure at the same time if you put down a little layer of compost as your fertilizer instead of some other kind of fertilizer. And then to get it tilled into the soil, let nature do it. Those earthworms and other soil microorganisms will do it for you. And you know what? I like being a lazy gardener, and you should too. But the topic of what we're going to really talk about today is that irrigation part, thoroughly, but not too frequently. So deep watering encourages healthy root development, and it helps plants to do better during drought. California experiences drought on a regular basis every summer. Climatologists are telling us now that we're not just in a drought, we're in what they're calling a mega drought. So we've got a lot of years of it to come, probably. And in mega droughts, we don't always get the replenishing water rainfall accumulation in the winter. Climate models for climate change show that the conditions we've been seeing over the last several years are what we should be expecting into the future. And they're going to be a lot closer to what our norm is going to be. What these models have been telling us is that the average amount of rainfall that we will be getting here in Marin County will be very similar to what our normal amount of rainfall has been in the past, but how we get it will be quite a bit different. As you've been probably noticing it, when we do get it, it's coming in bigger storms. And it's not having a lot of those slow, drizzly days through the winter like we used to have. And the storms are coming more on the shoulder seasons. Excuse me. Meaning that we're seeing them not in January and February, but we're seeing them in late November, December, and then again in March and April. And then if we were like last year, into May. So in general, when the soil is a lot drier, we get a lot more runoff. And when we get a lot more runoff, it makes it a lot harder to replenish that groundwater. So, and in heavy storms, it tends to run off more faster than it can sink in as well. So in any case, our normal wetter winters and seasonal droughts are going to be here with us for quite some time. So we've now had a very, very dry winter, and we came into this dry winter with a number, our groundwater reserves pretty well diminished over the last, 5 to 8 years. So there's not a lot of groundwater there like we often have had in the past to rely on. So in drought mode, what's a Marin gardener going to do? Well, we need to be focusing on helping our structural garden elements survive during this time period. These are the plants that are either very expensive to put into the ground. They have taken years and years to mature. Long establishment periods of time. So when we talk about structural garden elements, plants, we're talking about trees and shrubs and prized specimens. We are not talking about grass. We are willing to sacrifice elements that can be quickly replaced, like grass. Yes, it may be a little expensive to replace it, but you could, if we had a wetter year, you could have it up and working and looking really good in about a month. Not the 7+ years it's going to be required to get a tree to start looking like a tree. So you're going to want to make sure that you're getting the water right where it needs to go to. You're going to want to have it inspected on a real regular basis for breaks and leaks, because you got little guys like this guy that are hungry and thirsty out there as well, that'll be tapping into your irrigation line. Yes, they've chewed through my irrigation lines, as have rats, as have squirrels. So you need to be, it's not like getting it tuned, your irrigation system tuned up in the spring and then forgetting it until next spring. You need to look at it on a pretty regular basis. And while you're looking at your irrigation system, be looking at it to see that you're using all these resources the most effectively. But making sure that plants that we are going to keep through the drought healthy and that they're well watered are probably the best things that we can do. And it doesn't necessarily mean using a whole lot of water, but it's using it very wisely. Getting those roots to grow deep and healthy and watering deep and thoroughly are keys to the problem that we're trying to solve here. So let's start talking about those roots and where they are. So this diagram I've always been meaning to redraw this because this is the best one I can find, but it's not as good of a picture as I would like one of these days. Anyways, but what it shows is that for any plant's roots depth, in the top quarter of the root depth are 40% of the roots. By the time you get down and have half of the root depth covered, you've got 70% of the roots, 3/4 of the root depth comprise 90% of the roots. And you're only, that last quarter of the root depth, that's only 10% of the roots. I like to look at that diagram and say, if you look at a root structure of a plant, yeah, it looks like that when you look at like the diagram next to it. All these little roots here, there's more of them up here, and it gets smaller amount of them as you get farther down. So, but what's also interesting is that about a 70% of the moisture that's present in that soil and what the roots want to take up are in that 70%, the top 70% as well. So the amount of moisture that the roots can extract is pretty much proportional to its roots distribution. So if we can get water to the top half of the root zone of the plant, then it's going to probably do pretty well. This is going to vary a little bit by plant variety and soil type, but you're going to have to do some monitoring work in your garden to figure out how deep and how long to do some of the watering. And we'll talk to you a little bit about how we're going to do that. So during the daytime, roots work really, really hard. They're pulling as the photosynthesis is going on, and there's a process called evapotranspiration going on in daylight hours. The roots are taking in moisture from the soil depths from out on each side of it and from the depths and bringing it up, and it's transpiring it out through the whole day. And so if the plant gets most of its moisture from the soil in the top half of its root zone, and it's using that every day, wouldn't you think that you'd need to irrigate around the plant more frequently? Now, if I were making this presentation in person, like I've done before, it's at this point I see the majority of the people in the audience nodding. But the answer is no. The plant's roots are also working very hard at night as well. Even though they're not going through photosynthesis and they're not going through the evapotranspiration process, they're still bringing the moisture up from the depths, and then they're pushing it back out their roots into the top half of its root zone into the soil, so that during the heat of the next day, they're going to have that reserve of water ready right where they need it, and to be able to pull it back in. So if you've got big plants out in your garden like trees and large shrubs, and you have smaller plants near the canopy edge or underneath it, they're benefiting as well by having your heavy lifters. That's what we call the trees, the heavy lifters, because their root systems are extending out to the edge of where their canopy extends, and often well beyond that as well. And it's this extensive tree root network which benefits both the tree and the other nearby plants. So how deep do these roots go? Well, that's going to depend a little bit on the type of plant. So if you've got turf or ground cover or bedding plants, they tend to be very shallow rooted plants. They're smaller plants as well. They have roots that go down typically about 6 to 12 inches deep. Shrubs tend to have roots that are down 12 to 24 inches, and trees between 18 and 36 inches or more. You know, some of your other garden plants, some of your vegetable garden plants might have roots that go down deeper. Like your tomatoes, they want to put roots down to at least 4 feet if you give them that much to go on. And some of the native grasses, they often put them a lot deeper. You know, when we had the big dust storms in the plains in the 40s, that was because they had pulled out all the native grasses that were holding the soil together. And when they've gone back and look at how deep some of those grass roots were, they were 8 feet or more deep. So putting down deep roots can help, you know, it anchors the soil. It will help, you know, hold it together. But you got to also help them get the water down there so that they can do it. So how deep do we know that we need to water? Well, those smaller plants need about a foot of the water down to a foot. Shrubs typically would like it down to about 2, and trees down to 3 feet. But how do you measure that? Well, here's some examples and we'll help you figure that out. So several years ago before we had that interim year where we had a lot of water in the drought, probably of that 5 years, it was probably about 3.5 to 4 years into that 5-year period. I was working at the help desk one day, and there was a man came in, and he brought me some pictures of his tree, and it was in the middle of his yard, and it had grass underneath it. And he said, "Something's really wrong with my tree. It just doesn't look good. Look at it." And I looked at it, and I said it was water stressed, and he really didn't believe me. And then our staff horticulturist came by, and I said, "Well, you know, what do you think? Here's this picture. What do you think?" He says, "I think the tree looks water stressed." And the guy's going, "It can't be. It's in the middle of the lawn. The lawn's getting watered every other day. I'm not doing anything different. I've been watering this way for 25 years. Why is it just doing this now?" So we talked with them a little bit more, and we finally said, "Okay, we want you to go home and do an experiment and then call us back. And if we are right, it's a pretty quick fix for you. And if you are right, it's something bigger. And we're going to have to dig a whole lot deeper to figure out what it was." So we told him to go home and get his shovel out. And we asked him to go out to the canopy drip line. So I hope you can see my little pointer out here near where the edge of the tree's leaves are. And we asked him to put his shovel spade into the ground and, you know, get it down there as deep as he could get it, and then just pull it back. And so that he could reach in with his fingers. I like to call your fingers your built-in moisture meter that that travels with you wherever you go. It's better than anyone you can buy in the store. They're very sensitive. And if you can reach your fingers down in, you're going to reach down and feel in that soil all the way to the bottom of that area you've pulled back. If you can feel moisture all the way down, it should be moist, not wet. You are getting water down deep enough. If it's only in the very top inch or two, you need to water more. So this man called us back and he said, "Oh, you are so right. It was only moist 1 inch down." So how do I fix it? So we suggested he go out and get a couple of soaker hoses from his local hardware or garden store and lay them out on the ground under the edge of the canopy of his tree. And then turning the water on a soaker hose very low, leave it there for several hours. Move the hose around from time to time as necessary to get that worked in for several hours of a very slow drip all the way around the tree. And then wait a few hours and go back and do the test again. And we asked him to wait a while because we have a lot of clay soils around here, and it sometimes takes a while for the the moisture in clay soils to percolate down ways. So he was able then to be able to get the moisture down there. So if when he went back and tested it, it was only damp partway down, but not all the way down, it meant he needed to water a little bit more until he got it moist all the way down to the bottom of where his shovel blade had opened up for him. And that would be adequate. And he probably, with his big tree, probably would need to do that, you know, 1 or 2 times at most a month. A good, deep, slow, deep watering. But to know whether you need to do it or not, it's all going to depend on what kind of tree it is, what kind of plant it is, what your soil conditions are, you know, a number of things. So you're going to have to be the one that goes out there and performs that test to figure it out. You know, after you do this a number of times, you're going to get a pretty good feel for how frequently you need to be able to do this. So that same summer, I had another problem come in that illustrates how deep you've got to get water. And in a different situation. This was a person that lived in Ross on a hillside. And her neighbors behind her had had an irrigation break earlier in the summer. And the lower part of her hillside had got very, very wet. And along the back of her property, she had this big hedge of, I think, pittosporum trees, and it went up the hill. And the plants down at the bottom of her hill were doing very well, but the plants up at the top of her hill weren't doing so well. And she was very concerned about how much she was having to water. She was watering like every day, but not for very long. You know, 10 minutes every day or something like that. And I said, well, you need to water deeper. And it's the trees at the top of your hill that are having a hard time. They're looking very, very sad because they're not getting enough water. But the ones down at the bottom, they're fine. They still have all this moisture in the soil from your neighbor's irrigation break. Maybe you should thank your neighbor for all the water they gave you this summer. But anyways, go up and do the watering up higher on the hill. She goes, I can't put more water down. I said, I'm not asking you to put more water down. I'm asking you to put the water that you have been putting down wiser and in a different way than you've been doing it. Instead of watering every day, I want you to do it once a week, maybe every week and a half. But I want you to do it as a long, slow soak. So you're going to turn your irrigation on, and if it starts to run off, you're going to stop. And once it soaks in, you'll start your irrigation again. And given that you're on a hillside and we have clay soil, you may have to do this, you know, through several small cycles to get your hour of watering that you were doing before every week. You were doing it in increments all week long. Now you're going to do it all on one day, but you're going to get it. You may have to do it in little cycles. And most irrigation systems are set up to be able to accommodate doing this type of thing. So I'm assuming that this worked for her because she didn't come back and tell us that she still was having problems, which we had asked her to do. But I think it should have solved her problem. And another example that I had that same year, but later in the year, this was October, and a woman in San Rafael called, and she had a hedge that was very mature, 25 or 30 years. She'd been hand watering it for years, and it was looking very sickly. And again, the pictures that she sent me and that she described to me, the hedge was very drought stressed. She'd been hand watering it. And so I suggested that I told her that I thought it was water stress again and that she needed to be watering more. Oh no, I'm hand watering it every day, just like I've done for 25 years. It can't possibly be that. I said, well, has there been anything else going on? Is your neighbors doing any kind of construction out there that could have damaged roots or a water supply or anything? No, no. And so I finally suggested she sign up for one of our garden walks. So I talked to our garden walk manager, and she was in the office that day. She goes, I'll just stop there on my way home. You know, it's the end of the season. We're not doing any more, but I'll see what I can do for her. So our manager went out and she went to see this woman, and she had the hardest time finding a place to park on her street because there was all this sewer construction, reconstructing of all the sewer mains. Well, that was the thing. In the past, the shrub hedge had let its roots go searching for more nutrients and water. And they found it in the leaky water main in San Rafael. But San Rafael was fixing the leaky water main and it wasn't leaky anymore. And so the water and nutrient source was drying up completely. So she needed to water. But my experience with people that come into our help desk is if they tell me that they're hand watering, I can, 99% of the time will bet they aren't watering enough, because nobody wants to stand out there and water a plant for 20 minutes to get the water down deep enough. I know my husband certainly wouldn't do that before we got a drip irrigation system, and I was losing plants right and left until we got the drip irrigation system. I want to also give you a quick word about watering under oaks. Typically, we tell people not to water oaks in the summertime because they have grown up in Marin, right here, where we have the summer drought and the winter wets. And that's how they have evolved to deal with that kind of system. But we've got a lot of depleted groundwater sources now, even though they have very deep root systems. And we didn't get much winter water. So if you didn't fake the rain last winter when we were getting it, we were supposed to have gotten it, then you may have to give them a little bit of help this summer. And by little bit, I mean maybe one deep soak out at the edge of the canopy at the end of July, beginning of August, and nothing more until in October. And then about once a month, and fake the rain until the rains come. And if we don't get rain in the winter, go through March with a deep watering once a month through March, and then let them not have any more water until the following October or so. And that should help save your oaks. Okay. So about those roots, back to them and how you can help them seek out moisture, become stronger and healthier, and help support your plants during the drought better. Now this picture happens to be grass, but it wouldn't matter. Any kind of plant will do the same thing with the roots. If you water shallowly and frequently, your root system will look similar to that one that you see on the right, where there's a dense little mat of roots right up by the surface and very few that go deeper down. So if you water deeply and frequently, well, back to the shallow, frequent watering, the plant has no incentive to put roots down deeper or grow out wider, because why bother? Everything's right there. You're just giving them everything, especially if you're fertilizing too. You're not making them work hard at all. to really grow strong and healthy. They're just like a couch potato. It's the couch potato of the plant world when you do it that way. If you give them deep, frequent watering, yeah, they'll put their roots down deeper, but they still are kind of like that shallow, frequent one. They don't have much of a root structure. They aren't going to survive much if their water's, dries up at all, because they don't have much of a root network. But if you water deeply, but not very often, then those roots will work hard. They'll start forming a good network. You're giving them enough moisture to get out there and forage for more water, more nutrients, putting a lot more roots out there. And the more roots that they have, the deeper they go, the better they are able to withstand drought. The better they are able to gather the nutrients that they need in order to be a healthy plant. So that's why you're going to want to water deeply and infrequently. So how much you need to water and how often you need to water depends a lot upon the soil conditions that you have. So let's talk about them. So this would be the point in the lecture that if I were seeing you in person, I'd ask you, how many of you have sandy soils in your garden? And nobody in the audience would raise their hand. But if I asked you how many people had clay soils in their garden, almost everybody would raise their hand. And when I asked you, did you think that was terrible? And most people would nod. And I think you should be thinking about clay a little differently with where we live, because clay has got lots of nutrients associated with it. Yeah, it's got some challenges, but it holds a lot of water. So sand, if you think about it, having been at the beach and having sand in your hand, you can see each of those little sand grains, and they're all kind of round. And so if you put them in a jar, pretend that you've got something like a jar full of a big jar full of like ping pong balls. And you can see there's lots of spaces in there between all those ping pong balls, a lot of room for a lot of water. But if you had like a jar of really small particles, there'd be not as much room for a lot of water, and it would take longer for the water to drain through. Well, clay particles are really, really fine. Think like as fine as the particles in talcum powder, maybe finer. And they are not round, they are kind of flat. And they lay cattywampus all over. But sandy soils, when you put water on them, because there's so much space between all those particles, gravity just pulls the water almost all straight down. You have very little that expands horizontally due to capillary action. With the clayey soils, you have very little pore space between the particles. Capillary action takes a long time. It spreads it horizontally, and gravity will pull it down. So in the sandy soil picture here on the left, in 15 minutes, the water will go down, from where your emitter is, about 6 inches either side of the emitter, and go down about 12 inches. It stays down there at about that 6-inch depth. And it takes 40 minutes then to get down to 3 feet into the soil, and 60 minutes to get down a little over 4 feet. And it takes 24 hours to get down to 6 feet into the soil. But you notice in this graph that it never spreads out more than a foot either side of where the emitter is. In the clay soil with where the emitter is and it's putting water down, it takes 4 hours to get down to 2 feet. And by that time, it has also spread out to about 18 inches in either direction from the emitter. It takes 24 hours to get down to a depth of about 36 inches or 3 feet. And it's spread to either about 24 inches on either side of that emitter. And it takes 2 days to get down to a depth of 6 feet. That's why when I asked the guy to go out and check with his, do his soil test under his tree after he'd watered it, that's why I asked him to wait several hours before he went and tested it to see how far down that water had gotten. So what I like to say is this chart shows you why you want to do what we call hydrozoning your plants, because you want to put plants that are all of like water needs together, because where their emitters are, the water is spreading so much horizontally that you're gonna, if you water too much, you've got one that you've put a whole lot of emitters around because it needs more water than the one that's right next to it that needs almost none. Well, you can tell with capillary action, the one that needs almost no water is going to get more water than it wants, and it's probably going to get root rot and die. And the other one's going to thrive. Or if you're watering for the drought tolerant one, the wet one's not going to get enough. So you want to put plants that are all of like water needs together when you're irrigating. So, okay. How frequently should you do this watering? Well, in Marin County, most of us have a clay loam type soil. And with this chart, based on some studies that were done out at Texas A&M, they found that in sandy soils that you could wait. If you got your water down to 18 inches, you could go, about 7 days in between watering if your plants were deep enough rooted. In the clay soils that we have, if you get your water down to 18 inches, this chart shows you can go about 18 days between watering. Almost 20. So many of us have probably been watering a whole lot more than we need to, depending on what our plant depth, water depth is that we need to get to. If you're trying to get water down to 12 inches on this chart, and you've got a clay loam soil, you can probably go almost 2 weeks in between watering without too much of a problem. So this is why I'm saying that a lot of our landscape plants can deal with, reduced water levels during drought or summer droughts, because they really don't need to be watered all that frequently, providing you're using drought tolerant plants. So, and with clay hillsides, you may need to be doing this in little bursts, letting the water soak in, if you need to apply, say, 60 minutes of water to your tree, you're going to need to, maybe do it in 3 bursts of 20 minutes, wait 20 minutes till it perks in, another 20 minutes, wait for it to perk in, another 20 minutes. So, I sometimes, when I had grass and I watered grass because we had clay soil, I would have to do these little bursts of irrigation all within a 24-hour period on my grass, because it would just otherwise sit ponded there or get into my French drain and percolate out onto the gutter. So Yeah, we don't want that to be happening. But what's important is if you're going to do it in these little cycles is that you do all those cycles within a 24-hour period so that they're really getting the water down as deep as they need to go. Okay. So I know a number of you probably have some fruit trees in your gardens. So I wanted to talk a little bit about them. This is a diagram from the Marin Master Gardener Handbook. And tree A is a standard size fruit tree. It will get up over 30 feet high typically, and you can see it puts its roots down wider, deep and wider than the canopy is. And tree B is a tree that's grown on semi-dwarf rootstock. And you can tell it's smaller. It has a smaller root system, but still a pretty extensive one. Type tree C is on a semi-dwarfing rootstock with a semi-dwarf plant variety, and it's a smaller tree yet and has a smaller tree system. And then there's plant D here. This is a dwarf rootstock, but a standard sized tree grafted onto it. So that standard size tree would be tree A if it got enough water and nutrients from the root system. But because it's on that dwarf root system, that's what keeps the large amount of nutrients and water coming up into the tree that keeps it small. But because of that, if you have a semi-dwarf or a dwarf tree, these trees don't have big, huge root systems. They are not as drought tolerant as trees that are grown on either standard or semi-dwarfing rootstock, and they need their water managed a lot more carefully than these other trees. So you're going to need to make sure that they get a consistent level of moisture and maintain that pretty well. So you're going to need to adjust your irrigation of them accordingly. So I wanted to just make sure you understood a little bit about how they grow and their root systems so that you could handle that appropriately. Okay, so we've now talked about watering deeply and less frequently, but how do we keep all that moisture in the soil as long as possible? Well, we do that through mulch. And as a gardener, we think it's best if you can put down some kind of an organic mulch that will help build the soil. And, you know, almost anything can be used as a mulch because what you're trying to do with the mulch is to, you know, keep the roots cool by giving them some shade and protective cover and using that protective cover to slow down the evaporation and the heat of the sun and just be able to keep that moisture in there a little bit longer. I like to use compost for a lot of that because it's already broken down and it slowly works itself into the soil. As I said before, I'm a lazy gardener. I like to let those earthworms and other soil microorganisms do hard work for me. Let them do it. So in Master Gardener language, we often say mulch, 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 and compost, compost, compost. And it's good to do. So, but we also need to be smart about how we're dealing with mulch these days because we have fires that we have to deal with. And so ideally you would have nothing flammable within 5 feet of your house, maybe more, it would be good, of your structure. You certainly don't want a flammable or a combustible mulch there because the embers and firestorms tend to hit the houses and fall down. And if they fall into dried plant debris or some kind of mulch that has like wood chips or gorilla hair or anything like that, it can go up It can smolder for a long time. Even if they think they've put it out, it might still be smoldering enough to catch again. So our fire departments are recommending things more like a fully composted compost if you're right up near the house, or rock type mulches or paving type stones. So keep that in mind for at least the 5 feet out. Ideally, they'd like to see very little combustible mulch for 30 feet out. That's not doable for a lot of us on small suburban plots, but maybe the 5 feet is. So, do as best as you can with that there. I know it's being a very big challenge for me. So in summary here today, it's use our limited water resources most effectively and efficiently, working hard to save our structural plants and those that require a long establishment period or are expensive prize specimens. Sacrifice the plants that can be quickly replaced. Water deeply, but less frequently to develop a stronger and deeper root system that's more tolerant. Most plants are in the top 1 to 2 feet of soil, so if you get your water down to about a depth, 1 spade blade down, and it's moist like a well-wrung out sponge, then you're probably doing really well for all your plants. You might only need to water once every 1 to 2 weeks. Now, one thing I forgot to mention earlier was with that, don't go out and implement this kind of regimen with, like cold turkey for your plants. They're not going to be used to it. You're going to have to taper them off over a month or so to get them used to it. You're going to want to mulch to help them retain the soil, to retain the moisture longer and to keep everything, the roots cooler and be protected from both the wind and the sun. And you're going to want to use a non-flammable mulch, especially close to structures. Remember that smart gardeners and successful gardeners fertilize adequately, but not very much. Compost is usually enough. If they're going to use some kind of other application of fertilizer, it will be an organic fertilizer that slowly breaks down at about the same rate that the plant wants to use it. You are going to irrigate thoroughly, but not too frequently. This helps you build a strong, dense root system that can find the moisture and the nutrients and becomes a drought-tolerant plant. By doing things like putting compost down and having a dense root system, you're going to promote good soil structure. This is going to be helping put good organic material into the soil. And you don't really want to dig it much at all, because that breaks up the soil structure that you've got. All these little microorganisms have been working hard to glue it all together so that that network of all these different things underneath that taps in with works with your root system to get nutrients and moisture into the plants can continue doing that. And every time you dig it up, you break that up. So the less you can do of that, the better you will be. So we've got a number of references here. I will be giving Linda this list so that you can, if you email her, she can send this to you, or you can get it from the video once she posts it. Watering Guidelines is a brochure, it's several pages long, written by our staff horticulturist, Stephen Swain. And he talks about how to determine what kind of soil type you have and how to, check your soil down to see how moist it's getting, similar to some of the things I've talked to you about today. The mulch brochure is put together by it's the Bay Friendly Guide to Mulch. It's the best mulch brochure that I've seen. It's available on our website under our Garden Walks resources section. And this is the link to it as well. It's put together by the former Bay Friendly Sustainable Landscape Practices group. And Soil Matters is really a wonderful brochure that was put together by Bay Nature magazine. It shows you all the little wonderful things that actually live in the soil. You want your soil to be alive, and you want to find little things like earthworms and other microorganisms and stuff growing and moving around in there, tilling the soil for you. And that talks a lot about how you can help build your soil as well. It's a wonderful brochure. There are ways you can stay in touch with us as Master Gardeners. Today's brand new issue of the leaflet is out, and it's a quarterly publication on with seasonal gardening advice. You can sign up for that on our website. As for garden walks, you can sign up there as well. Home visits by Master Gardeners offering advice on irrigation practices and water-wise plants. It's my understanding they've got quite a waiting list right now because they weren't able to do water walks this past year. But good luck, and they offer it to, it used to be only offered to people within the Marin Municipal Water District, and it's been now for about the last year or so also being offered to people throughout the county. And if you're interested in becoming a new Master Gardener, well, the applications are, I say now, but it's, I guess it is actually today that they went online with the applications. So if you're thinking you might want to become a Master Gardener, check it out. Okay, let's stay in touch. The help desk is going to be actually reopening in person. We expect on July 6th for people to drop in samples. We've been working this past year only via email, and we are, running behind, but like you, we are pandemic weary as well, and we've only had a small number of the most experienced help desk volunteers working on that. But we are looking forward to being back and being able to help you in person. So we're the Marin Master Gardeners. We offer advice to grow by. Ask us. And Linda, I'm sure we must have some questions by now, huh?
We do have some questions.
And I've got to quit sharing here. Stop the share. There we go.
So there's several drip line questions. One person's tree drip lines extend into her neighbor's yard, so she can't water the full drip line. She can water her side of the fence, but not their side of the fence.
Well, just do the best you can is all we can say. Do what you can do. And maybe you're on nice terms with your neighbor, and maybe you can talk to them because maybe they like your tree too. Of course, if they don't, well, you'll have to work that out.
And then someone has a bunch of oaks on a steep property and all the canopies overlap. So how do you judge which drip line to water?
Well, you'd need to, if they're on a slope and if they're up on the hillside, I think you just sort of, and they're outside of your area that you're actually gardening in, then and you're not usually giving them extra water, then I don't think I would worry about them. They figured out a way to do it, but you would be putting it out, as close to the canopy. If you're going to get up there and water it, you would need to water along all of their drip lines anyway. So you're going to work more on the outside edges of all of them. And if you've got an upper side of the hillside, it's going to drain down and will hit some of the ones that are sort of in between, but get the outside edges the most.
Okay. And when you use a soaker hose for deep watering, how many gallons of water are you putting into the ground?
I don't know. That's why you have to get out there and deal with it. But it's a pretty slow thing. And that's why I suggest not turning it on full blast, but very low on your faucet so that it's just putting out this trickle that goes in there very, very slowly. And remember, you're going to be doing something like this maybe once a month. at most twice, but I would start with once a month.
Okay. And what time of day is good for watering, morning or evening?
Well, typically it's best to do it when it's not daylight hours out there, or at dusk, and from dusk until dawn basically is it. I know that my water district is suggesting that your watering is done before 9 a.m. in the morning, even if you're hand watering.
Okay, let's see. Oh, one person missed what a fire smart mulch would be.
It would be things like rock or paving stones or fully composted material.
Oh, okay, and someone is worried about watering coast live oaks in the summer. It can kill them due to fungus. Don't water oaks.
Well, as we mentioned, that they typically get their water in the wintertime, but they didn't get much water this year. So if they are looking a little bit peaked, you may need to give them a little bit of supplemental water this summer. And that's why we are suggesting one deep watering, maybe at about the end of July, and then not anything more. You would then, if we still are not getting water into the winter time, in the October to March time period when they normally would get Mother Nature doing it, this is when we say you need to help Mother Nature and fake the rain. They will think it's Mother Nature doing it, putting it down into the roots. So, and then after that, if they've got water all through October into March, and we were doing like that deep watering once a month if they're not getting the rain, then you wouldn't expect to do any more deep watering the following summer. But if you didn't give them any water this past winter, you might need to this summer.
Okay, and what about deep root watering tools? Are they for trees? Are they of any value?
The science that UC has done has not found them to be of any help.
So the Ross root feeder isn't effective?
Not that I know of.
Okay, well, that is all of our questions, Lois, and thank you so much for all the good information.
Okay, thank you.
And if anybody wants the handouts, just email me. I put my address in the chat. It's laldrich@marincounty.org, and then I can send you the resources. So thank you very much for all attending. And thank you, Lois, for all the information. It was great and well needed.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.
Thank you for listening, everybody.
Bye-bye.